Okay, so now we're going to kind of narrow in on our 4 macromolecules, and we're going to start with carbohydrates. So if we're talking about carbohydrates, that's basically talking about sugars and then talking about starches if we're referring to plants. All carbohydrates have something in common. They all contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen as part of their molecular formula. And not only do they contain these 3 atoms, but they contain them in a specific ratio, which is 1 to 1. So for example, glucose is C6H12O6. If we look at the number of each one of these atoms, it falls into a 1 to 1 ratio. There's 3 main classes of carbohydrates. So we have our monosaccharides. Those are our individual monomers that make up carbohydrates. If we take 2 monosaccharides and we link them together, we then have a disaccharide. If we have any more than 2 monosaccharides linked together, so 3 or more, then we just refer to it as a polysaccharide. Carbohydrates' predominant function in our body is basically to be used as a sort of fuel in order for us to synthesize ATP. If we have plenty of ATP available in our body, then we're going to store our glucose as glycogen or as fat. So we'll talk a lot more about how we convert glucose into ATP when we hit the skeletal muscular system, and when we talk about cellular respiration, which is occurring in the mitochondria. So here's examples of our monosaccharides. So our 3 main simple sugars that are linked together to form disaccharides are fructose, and galactose. I would kind of be aware of what examples of these monosaccharides are. Something else that you probably haven't thought about before, but those sugars that make up the nucleotides in our DNA and RNA, those are also considered monosaccharides because they're not linked to other sugars. So our general formula for a nucleotide is some sort of sugar. And we'll talk about this later. A phosphate and then a nitrogenous base. And this is what one nucleotide looks like. So the sugar, whether it's a deoxyribose or ribose, that sugar is considered a monosaccharide. So then if we take any of those up here, these 3 monosaccharides, and we link them together to form a disaccharide, we can get different things. So for example, glucose and fructose combined together make sucrose, glucose and glucose make maltose, and galactose and glucose make lactose. So these are basically double sugars. If we want to link 2 monosaccharides together, remember that is a dehydration reaction in order to go in there and create that bond between 2 monomers. We could also say it's a synthesis reaction because we're building something up and making it larger. And we could also say it's an anabolic reaction. And anytime we're building something up from smaller pieces, that means that it's going to require energy, which means that it's endergonic. So those are some terms that we can use to talk about formation of these macromolecules from their simple monomers. Again, this does not just apply to carbohydrates, it's any of these macromolecules that we're discussing. So then if we have 3 or more sugars linked together, we then refer to it as a polysaccharide. I mentioned previously that glycogen is our predominant polysaccharide that we have in our body. So that's how we store our carbohydrates. For plants, they store their carbohydrates in the form of starch.